hopefully you can hear me. How's it going? I'm James from Fujifilm. Sorry I'm a little bit late. Had some computer issues, but we are here finally. So hopefully you can all hear me. Basically, I'm going to go through a little bit of a rundown on the new XE4. Going to talk about the 70 to 300, the new one, the 10 to 24, and the 27mm as well. There are some questions. If you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. I will answer them as I go. Feel free to just jump in at any point. If there are any questions that I can't answer immediately or I've got to go and check, just put them in there and I will come back to you as soon as I can. Now, hopefully, I should be able to share my screen, but if not, I'm going to walk you through the XE4. I'll talk a little bit about it. Owen, I can see you're calling me. I'm on live. Hopefully you can see me as well. So I'm not going to answer this, but if you're watching the stream, all should be good. So the XE4, let's see if I can share that screen. If not, I'm going to do it old-fashioned and just tell you about it as we go. Where are we? Can I share the screen? No, I can't. All right, well, let's do it the old-fashioned way. Let's tell you about the camera. So the XE4 is the latest camera in our kind of very small, compact, interchangeable lens system cameras. It's very similar. It builds on the XE3, so it's a kind of small, pocketable, very discreet camera. It's about the same kind of shape and size as an X100V, if you've seen one of those. So about yay big, nice and slim. Comes in black and silver. Now, like the rest of the range, it's got the 26 meg X-Trans4 CMOS backlit sensor. And what that means is that the pixels have the circuitry behind the pixel face. So as you're using your camera, for example, on a backlit sensor, instead of the wiring being in front of the pixels, when the light comes through, hits the sensor, the wiring's moved behind, which means the sensor can see more light, and it means that the wiring can be a little bit more complicated because it doesn't have to obstruct the front of the sensor. Basically, it means more light can hit your sensor and more processing can happen as well because there's more cabling to go through as well. Now, I mentioned it's an X-Trans sensor. Now, an X-Trans sensor is something that we have specifically. It's a Fujifilm technology. Basically, if you look at a normal sensor on other cameras, they have what's known as a Bayer pattern sensor, which is a repeating block of 4, which goes red, green, green, blue. So red, green, green, blue. Now, when you have a repeating pattern like that and you point it at something with a very high frequency of detail, for example, a brick wall. So you have a high resolution sensor, sees a high resolution subject with a lot of detail in it. You can get banding or moiré. You'll see it sometimes on TV. People are wearing tweed or something like that. You'll see banding come across. Now, the way you get around that on a Bayer pattern sensor is by blurring the image very slightly. So you use either an anti-aliasing filter, or you do it through software, or some manufacturers, they'll shape the sensor a little bit as well, just to give a little bit of blur. Obviously, blur is not great. We spend a lot of money on our professional lenses. We want them to be as sharp as possible. So the Fujifilm engineers, being of course film engineers as well, they realized that this didn't happen back in the day. We didn't have moiré on film. And that was because the silver halide crystals, the bits of the film that were actually sensitive to light, were just pasted on an emulsion. So it was just essentially random, it was organic. So what they did was they took the pattern of the Bayer, they took the RGB ratio and changed it to a revolving block of 9, I think it is. So it's less repetitive. The added bonus as well, on a Bayer pattern, if you take each line by line, vertically or horizontally, you only have red and green or green and blue. You don't have all 3 colours. On an X-Trans sensor, you do have all 3 colours. So if you're doing a sunset or something like that, we've got nice graduated colours. You're not having to, the sensor's not having to guess either red or blue every line and interpolate it. It can see what it is and work it all out. So the colours are really rich and really punchy, and the images, of course, when paired with our Fujinon lenses, are extremely sharp as well. Now, being a 26 meg sensor, you're getting a lot of data off the back of the camera, so file size is roughly kind of 50 megabytes-ish in RAW. That's if you run it in lossless compressed. You can, of course, run it in compressed RAW if you want to as well. I'm reliably informed by a lot of engineers from Fujifilm in Japan that the lossless compressed has no loss of detail at all. So it's all good. Me, because I'm stubborn and I'm old school, I always run uncompressed RAW. Gives me larger files. The reason we put lossless and uncompressed RAW on the camera is that some software doesn't always play nicely with a lossless compression algorithm. So we put uncompressed on if you just want to go with everything and everything will work with it. But I personally run uncompressed because even though I'm told by the people that built the camera that it's fine, I'm stubborn anyway. But you can run it in that, and of course, if you don't want to run in RAW or you just run more effectively, JPEGs. We shoot JPEGs and we do those with our film simulations, which is what we're known for as well. Now the film simulations, we've got 19 of them, 18 of them. Where are we? Hang on, let's count them. Sorry, 18 film simulations. You've got Provia, which is the standard film. It's kind of pretty neutral on colours. It's still nice and vivid, but not too punchy. Decent contrast. It's kind of a standard image as you and I would see it. Then you've got kind of the big hitters like Velvia, which is a very punchy, very vibrant, really vivid film simulation. That's great for sunsets, sunrises, flowers, colours, anything where you really want to accentuate colour and richness. Hasn't got quite as much latitude as Provia. It's a little bit more contrasty. But that's wonderful if you're trying to do kind of sunset silhouettes or something like that. Because it's very vibrant, I personally don't tend to use it for portraits because it would accentuate pink, and of course blood's red, so everyone looks like they've just run a marathon. But personal preference. And then you've got others such as you've got the classic chrome, which is very neutral, kind of muted, warm kind of look. A lot of people like that if they're looking for kind of the more retro style of photography. You've got Eterna if you're doing any cinema work. Eterna was a pretty desaturated film stock that meant that it could be graded afterwards. If you're shooting film, you could get it and grade it afterwards so that the colours would look as you want them to. And we also have Eterna Bleach Bypass as well, which is like that but very punchy. If you look at films like 300 with the Spartans fighting, that look was Eterna Bleach Bypass kind, or a Bleach Bypass kind of look. So it was a method of processing film back in the day. And then of course we get to my personal favourites, which are the Acros and the monochrome. So Acros is black and white film. I tend to run it with, you can put 3 artificial filters across, so red, green and yellow, and they will take the place of what a traditional colour filter would have done on black and white film. I tend to run with a red filter across on Acros because it makes the skies really punchy. Blue almost becomes black. So if you've got nice fluffy clouds, a lot of daylight, then that will make the skies look really dramatic and imposing. If you're looking to do portraits and you want to kind of accentuate the ruggedness of your subject perhaps, then a green filter will make them look a little bit more worn, weathered. A red or yellow filter will be a little bit more sympathetic to them. So you can change it as you want to. If you're shooting RAW and JPEG, then the RAW will give you the full sensor readout, which you can then apply afterwards to the film simulation that you want to. The JPEGs will be the film simulation that you've chosen, and like with any manufacturer, the JPEGs will also have the white balance set as well. So if you're shooting in quite difficult situations for white balance, you can do custom presets if you want to, but I would probably shoot RAW and then RAW and JPEG, and you can see what the film simulation is going to look like, or your aspect ratio or anything. Or if not, just shoot the RAW and then process it afterwards. As far as processing goes, the big two work with it. So Lightroom or Adobe Photoshop has one, and Capture One also work perfectly with Fujifilm. They've got presets as well in there for the film simulations. They're not exactly the same, but they're close enough. Otherwise, you can process in camera or do it through Silky Pix, which is our own one. But Lightroom and Capture One are the standards. So I'm going to run you through the spec of the XE4 a little bit. Apologies you're not seeing a PowerPoint of this. You're going to have to live with my face, apologies, but I'll run you through it anyway and we can go through. So as I mentioned, we talked about the sensor, so 26 meg X-Trans 4 CMOS sensor. The autofocus is exceptionally fast, especially when you've got something like the new 50mm f1. It'll focus very quickly in low light as well. We have put we've changed the screen on it, so it's 180 degree tilt screen, which also slides up from the top, so you can not necessarily use it for selfies, but if you're doing any video work or webcams or anything like that. So something like this, I'm currently using my XE4 with a 1655, but I could be using an XE4 as well. You can pop the screen up from behind it and you can see what's going on, which is quite nice. And also it'll tilt out from the bottom, so you can use it as a waist level finder if you want to. Of course, being an X series lens, X series body, you can run all the X series lenses. There's no problems with those at all. So right from kind of something tiny like the new 27mm, right up to the 200mm f2, which is an absolute beast of a thing. Stunning for wildlife, but they all work and they're all compatible, so you can choose from all of them. And the video as well will come across to, it's 4K, it's very high quality, and I'll go through that shortly. So I mentioned about the lenses. If you are shooting, and I mentioned about the low light focusing as well, if you are shooting with a 50mm f1, it'll go down to -7 EV for phase detection autofocus. It's a phase detection system, so it'll track very quickly across the whole frame. There's 425 focus points using just under 4 million pixels to focus, so very fast, very accurate. It goes right out to the edge of the frame as well. If you are shooting fast action sports, you can go up to 30 frames per second if you're using the electronic shutter, so it's very quick for that. But if you're not shooting sports or you don't need to go that fast, it'll still do 8 frames per second as well. And if you're shooting kind of people, weddings, or anything like that, or an event, it'll also do face detection as well. And that face detection will track backwards, forwards, left to right, up and down. It'll track in 3 dimensions essentially. You've also got the option on the face detect of doing eye priority. So you could choose just for the camera to pick out an eye. It'll see whichever one is nearest. Or alternatively, you can say subject left or right eye. So if you're doing a specific portrait, so if you're shooting me, for example, you wouldn't want it focused over here, you want it focused over here. So you can go right eye and it will focus on my right eye. And the angle for it is pretty good, even with my thick rim glasses. If I'm kind of at this angle, it will still pick up my face. So it's very smart and very fast as well. The as I mentioned, it's very similar in outlook to in style to an X100V. We wanted to bring that kind of design across to the XE4, so it's very small, very light. They're very similar. The X100V, of course, has the optical and digital viewfinder. It's the hybrid, so you've got the window on the front. The XE4, being a digital viewfinder only, doesn't have that, but it still looks very similar. Still nice and sleek. The edges of it are nicely defined as well. So it's a nice thing to handle and own, not only just for photography, but as an object as well. We played a little bit with the controls on the camera. So the shutter speed dial at the top still has the run through from bulb right through to 4,000th of a second. As you would expect, it has a sync speed of 180th of a second, but it also has the automatic mode, but now it has a programmed auto. So whereas previously, if you were shooting in aperture priority, you'd set your lens by the aperture to a number, to the aperture that you wanted, or if you're using a lens without an aperture ring, you'd set it through the front command dial. Now you can set it to programmed auto on the shutter speed dial, and that will do full auto for you, which is quite nice. So it's a little bit quicker as well, just to operate and use. It still runs on the NPW126S batteries. It's the same as X100V, X Pro 3. So it's nice and small, nice and light, but also gives a decent power output as well. And it will charge via USB-C if you want to. Now the viewfinder that I mentioned, it's a digital viewfinder. It's a 2.36 million dot viewfinder, so it's very bright, very clear, nice and contrasty. It's detailed as well, so you can see exactly what you're taking a photograph of. And because we are mirrorless, you've also got the ability to not only see your film simulation beforehand, but also your exposure and your white balance as well. So if you've got a very contrasty scene, I was talking about shooting Velvia with sunsets or sunrises earlier. If you are shooting a very contrasty scene, you can see exactly what you're going to get beforehand, which makes life a lot easier. I find I don't need to bracket anywhere near as much as I used to back in the day. And also as well, I can just see exactly what kind of image I'm going to get, so I can tune it on the fly. So that, paired with the battery being so good, means that I'm getting a lot of shots per charge. So it means my efficiency is a little bit higher, but also as well, when it comes through to sorting photos at the end of the day after I've done my photography, it means I'm not going through a number of shots per scene. I could just look at it and go, yep, that's the shot I wanted, it's perfect. Play with it a little bit in Photoshop or whatever, job done. No stress at all. The screen I talked about earlier being a flip out, it's a 180-degree flip out screen. It's a 3-inch screen, which is a touch screen. So the camera is very intuitive to use. If you want to, you can set swipes up, down, left and right for function buttons. But like the rest of the range as well, if you want to assign function buttons, you can do for things that you do a lot. So me, for example, I tend to change the film simulation a lot. I will possibly change the dynamic range mode depending on the kind of scene I'm shooting. I'll probably have face detection on or off as a toggle on or off. So to change your function buttons, turn the camera on, hold down display back for 4 seconds when it's on the live view, and it will come through with an options list basically, and you can choose which button you change. So I personally don't use AEL or AFL as AEL or AFL. I tend to have AFL on the shutter button, and AEL I don't need because I can see what I'm doing with the preview exposure. So I'll have that set to dynamic range, for example. But you can change it as you want to. You can have a fiddle. There's a function button on the top plate as well, which you can change. And as I said, those swipes can be changed as well. So it's nice and easy to set for how you want. You've got a focus lever on the back, the nubbin, just for changing the focus points as well, if you want to, and you can move them quickly around, or you can touch screen with it too. If you've got an option of choosing between, I think it's 117 or 425 focus points, depending on what you want to do with the camera. If you're shooting landscapes, you're composing on thirds. I'd possibly shoot on the lower number of focus points because you can just jog the joystick over quickly to get to thirds, whereas 425 is a lot of points over. But if you do find yourself over on one edge and you need to come back to the other, instead of having to tab all the way across, they wrap top and bottom, left and right as well. Now I mentioned video. The video is very high-end quality, so it's 4K, 30 frames per second. It'll shoot at 264 with no crop as well. I mentioned the Eterna film simulation earlier. If you are shooting and you don't want to grade it too much, the Eterna film simulation will give you a very neutral palette, but some colors as well. But if you do want to shoot log, you can do. It'll shoot 422 10-bit via the HDMI externally if you're going something like an Atomos or something like that, or it'll do 420 8-bit internally. The bit rate is 200 megabits per second, so still a lot of data there if you want to be editing your shots afterwards or editing your video. It has a USB-C, which I mentioned earlier, for charging. The USB-C can be used for the headphones, so if you get like a headphone jack, USB-C to 3.5mm, you can run headphones out for monitoring. But you've also got a microphone port in the side as well, which is a 3.5mm. If you're shooting 4K and you want to go a little bit faster on the slow motion, you can do. It'll do 240 frames per second in HD. So that's very fast if you want to go super slow motion. The face and eye detection works as well on the XE4 during the video, so you can of course set it to manual and you've got focus peaking if you want to for both stills and video, but if you want to use it for face detection you can do as well. Now because the touchscreen is available to be used for controls, if you're shooting and you're using on-camera microphones, or perhaps you're not using a microphone at all, you're just doing something really casual and you just want to shoot and not mess around with the buttons or not make any noises with the microphone, you can use the touchscreen for movie silent control. So you can change the settings through the camera through the touchscreen on the back. If you are shooting as well, if you're perhaps doing something like this or you're recording, it's got a tally light as well. You can see your time codes on it, so you can see exactly how much time you've got left. And if you're also shooting it and you're not using preview exposure and you want to see your contrast ratios, you have zebras on there as well. So a cracking little camera, which is great for video and also for stills for discrete photography and just generally for carrying around as well. If mentioned about the using it as a webcam, if you are using it as a webcam, then you just plug in your USB-C to the laptop, which is what I've got going at the moment. And there's a utility, it's a free one, it's called, what do we call it, something really obvious, Webcam 2, there we go, does exactly what it says on the tin. And with Webcam 2 you can change things, so I'm going to change things now whilst I'm talking to you. You can change, for example, the film simulation, so I mentioned it earlier, that's Provia. You can see it's a little bit warmer. If we look at Velvia, I immediately look like I'm panicking a little bit. Eterna, I was talking about the video simulation for Eterna, it's quite neutral. There it is, you can see. And if we go Eterna Bleach Bypass, everything gets a little bit more dramatic and contrasty. Now, when I was talking about Acros earlier, this is the standard Acros. Everything's nice. It's got a decent, nicely graduated tones. But if I wanted to look a little bit more kind of tired, that's the Acros with green. But equally, if I wanted to be a little bit more sympathetic, there's the Acros with red. So you can see it kind of is a little bit more sympathetic to skin, but you can change it as you want to. These film simulations can be changed as well. And on the app, you can see I'm changing these as we go. We can change exposure as well. So if the sun's coming in or out or whatever, you can change it. A thing that I like to do, prepare yourselves extreme close up. When I'm doing any demos and stuff, I can zoom in and out so I can show the screen on the camera. So you can, it's a very useful tool to have generally. Let's put that back to something normal. This is ProNex Standard. There we go, that's a little bit more normal. So you can use the camera as a webcam as well. So it's basically, it's an ideal kind of either a main camera if you want to go for something very lightweight, something nice and portable, easy to carry. Perhaps it's going to be a second camera as well. So if you're working professional, you've got your X Pro 3 or XT3, XT4, whatever, and you want another camera that's going to give the same image quality, but perhaps you're going to use as a backup, then you could get an XE4. It's nice and small, it slots in a bag or in a pocket, and it, of course, as I said, it will run with all of your lenses as well. So a lovely little thing. Two color options, black or silver. My personal preference is always the silver because I like the kind of retro look, but the black is very discreet as well, so you can choose. As you can see in the chats as I'm talking, the guys at Campkins are absolutely smashing through with the comments as well, linking to cameras. So you can see there, if you look in the chat, there's an X100V. If you look at the X100V, change the lens and knock out that window at the top right, that's exactly what an XE4 looks like. So I'm also going to talk to you about the lenses. So there's, as mentioned, there's 37 lenses at the moment that fit the X mount. They range right from the 8 to 16 2.8 right up to, for the longest, is the 100-400. But there's a whole range of lenses in the middle of them. So you've got the 8 to 16. I'll break it down into kind of groups of lenses. So you've got the 8 to 16 2.8, which is a 14 to 24 2.8. The 1655 2.8, which is a 2470 2.8. 5140 2.8, which is a 70 to 210. Then the 100-400, which you put 1.4 on the back of as well, so that'll give you 150-600. If you want to go extremely fast, we have the 200 f2 as well, which will give you a 300 f2, and again that has its own matched teleconverter as well, which is a 1.4. For prime lenses, we go right from 14mm, which gives you 21, right up to, what's the longest prime lens? The 200mm, but the longest normal one is, I think, is the 90mm f2, which gives you 135, and you can get them in all the focal lengths you would expect, so 35, 50. The new 50mm f1 is a 75mm for portraiture. That's stunning. For macro, there's an 80mm 2.8 with image stabilization as well, and that gives you 1:1, and that'll work with the teleconverters as well. So there's a wide range of lenses. I'll run you through a little bit of the detail on the lens ranges. So you've got XF and XC. XF lenses are usually metal mount, metal body. They'll have an aperture ring. They'll be weather resistant. That's the broad strokes of how to remember them. The XC lenses are still optical glass. They're still lovely quality, but they'll probably be plastic body, plastic mounts. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a lens that's not as good. If we take the 35mm f2 lens as an example, the XC and the XF are constructed differently body-wise. So the XF, as I said, is metal body, metal mount, aperture ring, weather resistant. The XC is plastic body, plastic mount, and is not weather resistant, doesn't have an aperture ring. But optically, they are the same lens. So you can look at going, I'm not going to get the lens wet. I'm not going to be too rugged with it. I can change my aperture with the front wheel. That doesn't matter. That's fine. I will save 100 and something pounds and get the XC lens. So there's a couple of options there. But by and large, they're all stunningly sharp. We don't run a kind of tier of good and superb. We just run great lenses the whole way through. And you can pick your focal length and go with it as you want to. I get a lot of questions about what kind of focal lengths people should use for kind of longer stuff. We've released the new 70-300, which I'll talk to you about. The 70-300 is an f4 to 5.6. It is weather resistant. It has a linear motor. What a linear motor means is that instead of focusing through a helicoil, so the elements twist as they go through, it zips up and down magnetic rails, a bit like the maglev train in Japan. So it's very, very fast for focusing. What you'll find is that if you're in a very silent room as well, you hear a little bit of whirring, but you can't hear that outdoors at all. But it means it's very fast and very accurate focusing. It has image stabilization on it as well, so if it's got OIS written on the lens, that has image stabilization. And of course it is weather resistant as well, so if you're using it with something like the XT3, XT4, then you'll be absolutely fine as well. Now what we've done with the 70-300 is that's kind of gone in between the 55-200 and the 100-400, which are both excellent lenses, but of course it'll give you a little bit more reach over the 55-200, but not as much as the 100-400, but it's substantially smaller and lighter. The weight of the 70-300 is 580 grams, which is not a lot at all. Lengthwise, it's about that long. As you can see, there is a link now in the chats, which is all good. So you can have a look at that and see the price of it as well. It's a really, really nice lens. I've had a play with it. I haven't had one yet, but I've had a bit of a play with it. Size-wise, it's only a fraction bigger than the 55-200, but that extra focal length is a lot more benefit. So for me, I'm probably going to find myself using the 70-300 more often than not, unless I'm doing anything where I'm specifically going out to shoot wildlife, in which case I'll take the 100-400. But it will work the teleconverter as well. So a 300 1.4 is going to give you nearly 600 mil, because it's 450 then times 1.4. It's small, as I said, size-wise, 580 grams. The filter size is 67 millimeters, so it's not that big at all. So it'll fit into a nice small bag easily. And as you would expect with a Fujifilm lens, it has all the controls on the outside. So it's got zoom and focus, but you've also got the aperture ring. Now the aperture ring has now got an automatic lock. So when you go through to A on the lens, it'll lock at A. So it's not a case as it has been with other lenses in the past where you go to kind of like f22 and you keep going and suddenly you're in automatic and that'll be a different aperture. It now locks into A if you want to use it that way, which is it's a small thing, but it's a nice thing. The image stabilization is a very capable unit. It'll give you 5.5 stops. Now, depending on which body you're using it with, if you're using it with something like an XS10 or an XT4, it'll work with the body to give you the best stabilization possible. If you're not using a body with image stabilization inbuilt, it'll just work through the lens, but it's very accurate and it stabilizes beautifully as well. Now, I'm going to be careful with how I say this. For not macro, it does focus closer than you would expect. So the lens focuses at 83 centimeters. So it's not pure macro, but it can be used out on the fly for closer than normal focusing. So if you are going out, and that's why I'm probably going to be using it a lot more compared to my 55-200, because it's a more flexible lens. Because if I'm out and about, I'm doing a little bit of nature, wildlife, whatever, there's a bee on a plant and I want to take a photograph of it, I can do, because it gives me closer than normal focusing. So not macro, closer than normal focusing. So that's going to be something I'm very much looking forward to getting out and playing with as well. Now, that's not the only lens that we launched recently. We also refreshed the 10-24. It's a new lens. It again has the aperture ring with the auto lock. We've put weather resistance on it. Now, the aperture ring on the previous 10-24 f4 didn't have any aperture markings on it at all. You just turned it and it was where it was, which was a weird thing, because normally we'd have those kind of aperture rings on a lens with a variable aperture. Because obviously, if you look at the 55-200 or 100-400, when you're wide open, it'll be at one aperture. When you zoom out or zoom in, it'll be at another aperture. So you can't have the markings written on the lens. So the 10-24, even though it's an f4 constant, the first one didn't have any markings on the aperture ring. Now it does, so it's easier and clearer to see and use. And as I said, the auto lock is very useful as well, just for finding up against where the auto lock is if I'm just stopping it down quickly and not really looking. We increased the image stabilization capability on it as well, so from 2.5 stops to 3.5 stops. It's still nice and small and lightweight, and it's still a 72mm filter as well, so that's all good. But yeah, nice, small, compact. Optically, it gives you exactly the same quality as the Mark 1 or the first one. So if you've got a first generation, or you've got the first 10-24 f4, you're not necessarily going to see anything optically different, but you will see weather resistance performance. You see weather resistance on it, and you'll see increased image stabilization as well. The reason we kept it was because the lens was outstanding to begin with, to be fair. So a cracking lens and a nice upgrade. We've also done a similar kind of thing to the 27mm f2.8. The aperture ring again has the auto lock on it, and it's now weather resistant too. It goes from 2.8 to f16, so you can stop it down, but obviously being a nice wide lens, you're getting a decent amount of depth of field anyway. But it is very small and lightweight. It's 84 grams, which is not a lot at all. So really, really tiny. It'll do 6.5 stops of image stabilization with an XT4, so you can shoot in very low light. You can almost kind of one-hand it, so if you're doing very quick photography, you'll be fine. But it's just a nice little lens, very discreet, especially when you put it on something like the XE4. It becomes a very small, very tiny camera, just to have as a runaround. At a 27mm, because we're running on APS-C, that's a 1.5 times crop, so 27 gives you a 40 effective. And that's kind of where we are with the new releases. We've got the 70-300, the 10-24, and the 27mm 2.8. They were all announced at about the same time as the XE4. And as I said, the XE4 was the upgrade to the XE3. It brings it in line with the rest of the range with the new 26 meg X-Trans 4 sensor. So cracking quality, nice and small and lightweight, and comes in silver. So it's a pass from me. It's all good. Just seeing through the questions, we'll have a look through. I see that the guys at Campkins are absolutely chucking out all of the lenses, which is all good. And I see a question here from David. What's David asking? Is it possible to have a firmware upgrade for the XT4 to give a red screen for night work, please, as is on the Pentax K1? So you shouldn't need to. You can go, if you go into, where's my XT3? Hang on. Let's have a look. There should be on your camera. If you go menu, into the spanner settings, and then go into screen setup, you can go through to, there is an option for it if memory serves. So if you go to information contrast adjust, which will be menu, spanner, screen settings, information contrast adjust, you can go to a mode called dark ambient lighting, and it looks like that. So it'll do it already in camera, so no firmware adjustment needed, which is all good. And when you are using it, put my hand across, you can see everything goes, excuse the red of my hand, but you can see all the data there goes red on camera. So it can be done already. So no firmware upgrade needed. Happy days. I hope that helps. That is actually quite a nice thing for astrophotography. I was doing some stuff with my, what was it? I was using the 50S, one of the GFXs. I was out doing some photography out in the back garden because although I live in a town, the nights were clear during lockdown. We had some really nice clear skies and shot some stuff and forgot to set that. And of course, turned the screen on. It was like light in my face and all my night vision had gone. So if you are doing something like that, or even if you're shooting kind of weddings or anything like that, you're doing first dance, it's a really nice, useful setting to use. Equally, of course, it goes the other way. If you're shooting extremely bright light, you can change the contrast as well on the screen to make it a little bit more punchy and a little bit clearer. I personally don't find that I need to, because if it's too bright and I can't see the screen, unlikely, but if it is, I will use the viewfinder. So I'll go menu whilst looking through the viewfinder and change everything through there, because of course we can see exactly what's going on through the viewfinder all the time. The joy of mirrorless is that the rear screen and the viewfinder, they replicate each other, so there's no problems there at all. David said, "Great. I've only had the T4 for a couple of weeks, still learning. No problems at all. It's a very niche menu option that we don't see a lot of. I usually set it as a test for people when we're doing some training, just to see how au fait they are with the camera. So I'm not surprised you didn't find it. Equally, if you've got any queries, any questions on your gear, you have got, of course, Campkins. You can give them a call. And in the unlikely situation that they can't answer the question, they'll get in touch with us. Or equally, you can get in touch with us through the House of Photography. So any questions, any queries, have a chat with Campkins and they'll be more than happy to help you out. Another David has asked, will the 7300 be compatible with the XT1? Yeah, no problems at all. That should be all fine. It's an X series lens, it's an X series body. They'll all mount across. That'll be fine. So I've got another question here from Madingley Cricket Club. Waiting for the 7300, when will they arrive? Pass is the honest answer. So let me just autofocus on my face because I moved. Pass is the honest answer. Being technical, I don't get to see when deliveries or anything like that are made or expected. Soon, hopefully. Your best bet, have a chat with the gang at Campkins and they will be able to give you hopefully a more accurate date or at least a ballpark. Soon though, because I'm waiting for mine as well. So fingers crossed, not too much longer at all. Just having a look through where are we? Let's see if there are any other questions. I linked. I was just looking through all the links that are there. So they've really got into it. So you've got the XT4 that's linked, the 50mm f1, X100V, 816-28, 1655 28 100 400 5140. Yeah, they're all good. That 35 f2XC that you've linked to, what a cracking lens. As I said, it's the same lens internally as the 35 f2 XF. But for the price, you really can't argue with it. It's really sharp, nice and small and lightweight. And again, if you're carrying kind of the XE4 as a discrete kind of day trip, city break, when that can all happen, of course, once we can come out of lockdown and go back to some kind of semblance of normality. Something like a city break, an XE4 with maybe the 27mm, the 35, and maybe the 50 f2, and possibly something like a 16mm 2.8. It's just a nice compact system. It's going to fit in the bag about yay big, give or take. What a lovely little kit for just running around taking photos whilst having a holiday, which of course, as I'm sure you are all as well, very much looking forward to once we can get back out into the world. It'll be really good fun. But also as well, I usually tend to take the XE series cameras to things like family events, because obviously working for Fujifilm, there is an expectation from the family that I'm going to turn up with a whole raft of camera gear. Usually there's a little bit of good-natured ribbing when I do that. So I'll carry a smaller camera and a selection of lenses just to kind of make sure they don't take the mickey too much. So an XE4 would be cracking with those lenses as well. But if you are doing anything a little bit more involved, so something like the 100-400 wildlife or anything, you can of course bolt it on and that'll be absolutely fine as well. I'd just suggest maybe using a monopod if you're shooting for a long period of time. Or you can put it on a tripod, or if you're doing birding or something like that, if you're at a wildlife at a hide, sometimes you'll find there's already clamps with ball heads on it, so you can just mount the 100-400 via the tripod shoe and just have a nice small system and not worry about it. With a tilt out screen, you can put it in all sorts of positions and still see what's going on as well. So really nice and simple and lightweight, especially when you're working in a space that's restricted, restricted movement like a hide or something like that. We'll just scroll through, see if there are any more comments and questions. Campkins is saying that Fujifilm suggested mid to end of April. Excellent, happy days. Then hopefully I'll be getting mine at the same time. Fingers crossed, because the one I played with was really, really lovely, and I'm looking forward to it as well. So it's all good. The guys from Cambridge, the guys from reading Cambridge Photographic Week. The guys from Campkins have also linked the 50mm f2, and you'll see they've linked that in silver. Again, a lovely choice. A lot of the primes come in silver or black, so the 16-2.8, 23 f2, 35 f2 XF, and the 50 f2, you have an option of silver or black for those. Personal preference, there is always an argument amongst the team. When we get our gear, we're very fortunate, we get to pick the colours usually. So some will go for black lenses, some will go for silver. I personally tend to go for a black lens because if I'm using it with a body like, although my X-T4 that I'm shooting on at the moment is silver, if I'm ever using it on something like the XS10, I prefer a black lens on a black camera, and I can live with a black lens on a silver camera. But personal preference, I've seen people doing all sorts of mix. You know, if you want to go kind of classic old school blad, then a silver lens on a black body was pretty retro cool. So you can do it as you want to. I mentioned the XS10 just now. That's not what I've covered in this talk. Just before Christmas, where we were kind of between lockdowns, I did a demo day in Campkins with the XS10, which was good. That was well received. People came and saw me and they liked what they saw, which was all good. But just to give you an overview on the spec of that as well, same 26 meg X-Trans 4 backlit sensor that's in the XE4 as well, so the image quality is there. Has an IBIS system as well. It's not quite as sophisticated as on the X-T4, but it's close. I think it's what, 5.5 stops instead of 6 stops off the top of my head. So very good, still very capable, and that will work with lenses with image stabilization in them to give you the best results, or give lenses like the prime lenses I've just described, the 35 f2s, the 50s, all of that. It'll give those image stabilization as well. Has a flip out screen to the side that you can turn around, so if you are doing video, so for example when I'm doing one-to-ones or things like this, if I'm doing a talk about the XS10, I'll use my X-T4. If I'm doing a talk about the X-T4, I'll use my XS10. So you can chop and change those between and use them as webcam as well. Compared to the X-T4, it's a little bit lighter, a little bit cheaper as well. It's not, the X-T4 is perhaps the more rugged, and pro is a dangerous word to use because people assume pro equals excellent image quality, but the sensor is the same. But the X-T4 has dual card slots. So if you are a working professional and you want to have the cards back up, the X-T4 gives you that. The XS10 has one card slot, but it's smaller and lighter and cheaper. It's not weather resistant. So again, if you're going to get it wet, then something like an X-T3 or an X-T4 is the more suitable choice. But again, like an X Pro 3 to an XE4, having it as a backup, an XS10 as a backup to an X-T4 is lovely. Or if you're not going to go out there and shoot in horrendous conditions, an XS10 is stunning anyway. It's a really capable camera. It's got a very nice grip on it as well if you are using it with a longer lens. So a nice camera that's very simple and easy to use. The XS10, we've departed a little bit from the standard Fujifilm controls. Instead of having the shutter speed dial on the top like the XE4 with the aperture ring at the front, you've now got an MASP dial, which is manual aperture priority shutter and program. But that also gives you the option of doing 4 custom settings as well, custom 1 to 4, which for the first time on a Fujifilm camera is not just kind of your white balance, your highlight tone, your shadow tone, what film simulation. It also gives you the option now of doing different focusing modes. So do you want to shoot face detection? Do you want to shoot spot focus? How you want to shoot it in different modes overall, rather than just being image quality modes. So it's a lot faster to operate if, for example, one day you're in a studio, one day you're doing landscapes out in the field. You can chop and change between them. So it's a really useful camera for that as well. And it's a nice camera to get in for people who are perhaps not already Fujifilm users and are maybe put off. You know, we're pretty pragmatic about it. Some people don't like all the numbers and dials. The majority of Fujifilm users do because we are mostly used to cameras from back in the day which had dials on it. But some people just like MASP. So the XS10 gives that option as well. But as I said, excellent image quality, right the same image quality as the X-T4, X-T3 Pro 3, and all the rest of the range, including the XE4, because it's that 26 meg X-Trans 4 sensor, which is backlit. So it gives excellent low light performance as well. I can see just in the corner, of the screen here, we've got a question. David has asked, he says that the 70-300 does not have a tripod mount. Is that necessary? No. If it was, it would have been included. The engineers are pretty hardline about that kind of thing. Um, will depend, of course, on your tripod and how stable it is. But it's not a very heavy lens. It's what, 580 grams, which isn't much at all. So although physically it's got some volume, it's not dense. So it's nice and lightweight. Even when you're putting it on something like the XE4, where a very small lightweight body with a longer lens on it, you should be absolutely fine. Obviously, it'll depend on what tripod you're using and what plate you're using. If you're putting it on a very small tripod that's really extended with the central column right up, it won't necessarily be stable generally because the tripod will be a little bit top heavy. But as far as rigidity and kind of holding the camera and lens safely, no, it's absolutely fine. It'll be all good. What else have we got? Campkins have linked to the XS10. That's all good. Yeah, Campkins is saying exactly what I said. Although we haven't handled the lens yet, a tripod mount on a 70-300 is rare. Therefore, we do not think it's necessary. Yeah, absolutely. There are. Trying to think how many 70-300s I know of with a tripod mount. There was one back in the day from another manufacturer, but the lens was like this big and weighed a kilo or so. It was an absolute monster of a thing. A very rare lens to sell, to be fair, when I was working on the camera shops back in the day. And that had a tripod mount, but that's the only one. Trying to think if there are any other. No, nobody else that I can think of from any of the manufacturers as a 70-300 with a tripod mount. They tend not to be too. Obviously, you've got to have them be a certain size because the lens needs to move and focus and zoom, but they don't tend to be particularly heavy lenses. So they're, as I said, volume rather than mass. So it won't be a problem at all. Obviously, make sure your tripod is stable enough, but then that goes for any lens and any camera mount, to be fair. There's no point in putting a sizable or a heavy camera on a very small noodly tripod because you're going to get flex in it anyway. So as with everything, be realistic in your expectations on the tripod and you should be all good. David has responded that he has a Manfrotto carbon fibre tripod, so very stable. Yeah, me too. What am I using at the moment? That is it 190 or an 055? It's a 190. No, it might be an 055. No, it's a 190 Go. There you go. It's got it written on it. I've got a Manfrotto carbon 190 Go, and it holds those, including the kind of the 200mm f2, 100-400. It'll hold the GFXs when I put them on as well. So a nice stable tripod is key, and you'll be game on. It's all good. So where are we with time? What are we? I've been yammering at you all now for 45 minutes. So hopefully, I said apologies I hadn't got the cameras or the screen share wasn't working. Cameras, I'm your guy. Computers, not so much. But obviously, if you do want to get your hands on or want to talk to anyone more about them, have a chat with the gang at Campkins. They will get them in as soon as possible when they've got them in, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to do a demo with you. Equally, if you've got any other questions that they perhaps, in the unlikely event they can't answer, they'll ping them on to me. Stick any questions in the chat as well, and I'll keep an eye on that from time to time and answer any questions that you have got. But otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed the talk. It's been good fun. Thank you for asking your questions and engaging. That's always good when that happens. So thank you very much. And any queries and questions or anything, get in touch with the gang at Campkins and they'll be more than happy to help you out. Cheers, everyone. Have a good weekend.